Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So we're working on the Nova project today, and the project today, as you might be able to tell already, is to do the transmission pan. We've got a replacement transmission pan. This is something that I found on Amazon. It actually has the drain plug on it. The stock pan on the 1978 Chevy Nova that we have in front of us has the 350 turbo, also known as the TH350 transmission, and it does not have a drain plug on the pan. So I'm replacing the pan while we're under there today. We're taking this off because our gasket that's on the pan is bad and it's actually leaking transmission fluid into a drain pan right now. So I've picked up this ATP B45 as the part number, and this is a transmission filter kit. So it comes with the replacement transmission filter, it comes with the gasket to mount the filter, it comes with the O-ring on the plug that goes into the filter, and we've got a replacement gasket. This is like the felt material gasket. This isn't cork and it's not paper. While we're in here, we're also going to replace the bolts on the transmission pan. So the transmission pan itself is just getting a full refresh. We'll have new gasket, new filter, gaskets for the filter, O-ring, the transmission pan itself, and new bolts. So what I want to go over right now is some information on doing this job. So the bolts that are on there now that are coming off are a 1/2 inch, so we're going to use a 1/2 inch socket to take these off. The bolts that we're replacing it with are 1/2 inch as well. I'll have links in the description for the pan, the bolts, and the filter kit, so you can look in the description for that. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Subscriptions are the most important thing for my channel right now, so please subscribe. When we go to put the pan back together, we need to make sure that we torque these bolts to a certain specification, and the specification on that is 10.5 to 13 foot-pounds. So I've already set this torque wrench at 12. I'm going to do 12 foot-pounds all the way around. I did not find a torque sequence like when you're doing the lug nuts on a car. You typically go in a star pattern. There's no torque sequence that I found for this, so what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to work from the middle bolts on each side and then work my way out to the corners, and I'll probably go in a kind of a cross pattern. But don't just start in a corner and work your way in a circle. You could do that just to tighten them up enough to snug the pan up, but when you actually go to do the torque spec on it, just make sure that you're moving around. Don't just go in a circle counterclockwise or clockwise. The transmission lines that come up to the radiator, that's what cools the transmission fluid that goes down into the transmission. I am going to pull those hoses off and just make sure there's not a vacuum on those lines, and all that fluid also leaks out. It comes out when we drain the pan. So the pan that's on there now, because it doesn't have a drain plug, what you have to do is you have to loosen up all the bolts and then break the seal, pry the pan off the bottom of the transmission to break the seal. And my suggestion would be to loosen, I'm going to show you like this. What I would do is I would loosen the bottom side of the pan more than the bolts on the top, so that the pan tilts down this way, and that way at least the fluid will be kind of centered going off into the drain pan, and hopefully just not draining all over the place. I've got a big plastic cover that I'm going to put on the ground to try to catch any drips that miss the drain pan. So that's pretty much it up top. This is everything that we need at this point. We got a little light that we can throw up underneath here while we're working to shed a little light on the subject while we're working. And yeah, next step we're going to do is get up underneath and pull the bolts on the transmission pan the way it is now. Get that pan down. I've got a razor here to clean off the gasket that was made. It's not a cork, a paper, or a felt gasket. The gasket that's under there now is actually a Permatech. It's called Gasket Maker, and it's red. So the Permatech gasket maker, we're going to need to scrape off the bottom of the transmission itself. The filter kit that's here, I think I mentioned it, but they call this a third-hand pan gasket, and the reason is because there are holes that are in here that are smaller than some of the other ones. And the reason that they're smaller, if you look between these two, these are both the same bolt hole, but what happens with this is the bolt fits freely through the bigger holes, but on the smaller hole it's a little bit tighter. So what you can do with this is you can put this on the pan and then go ahead and put your bolt through the pan and into the gasket, and the gasket is tight enough that it'll actually hold the bolt in place. That's the third hand, so you don't have to have one hand holding it, one hand trying to put the screw in, and then one hand trying to put a socket on it. You can put the pan up, get a couple of these bolts started, and the gasket itself will actually hold it in place. So that's what that's for, the third hand. That's why that says that, in case you were wondering. So now we're just gonna get up underneath the car and take a look at the bottom of the pan and show you what it looks like underneath. So we're up underneath the car now, and this is the transmission pan. This is not the oil pan. The oil pan's further up on the bottom of the motor. So the transmission pan is here. As you can tell, it's got the same shape as the gasket that was on the back of the car. It's also got the same shape as the pan. So there's an option for the pan that I purchased. You can actually get a pan that's about 2 inches deeper. I believe this one is a 2-inch, and I bought the 2-inch replacement, but you can also buy a 4-inch. The 4-inch just gives you more quantity of transmission fluid in the pan, but the 2-inch actually makes it so that the transmission cross member here that kind of protects the transmission would be about the same height as the transmission pan, because the pan would be closer to the ground and I don't want the pan getting hit, so I just went with the replacement of the same size. As you can see, this does not have the drain plug on it like our new pan has, so that's going to be an awesome feature to be able to drain this whenever we need to without having to drop the pan. I believe this is probably going to make a bigger mess than we want to make. When we take this down, like I mentioned, we're going to go around the bolts and loosen up the bolts, and then loosen the bolts over on this side, because this is a lower part of the car. We are going to loosen this side, the bolts over here, more than the front, so that the pan dips down a little bit, so we can hopefully use our drain pan that's under here and catch most of the dripping. Hopefully will come from this edge and it'll go into the drain pan and not just go all over the ground. I've got a big plastic piece that's underneath the drain pan to catch anything that we miss. I do not want transmission fluid all over our driveway. That stuff does not seem to clean off as easy, even as oil, even if you put some kitty litter or floor dry down. So these are all 1/2-inch bolts. We're going to take all these bolts out, eventually get this pan dropped down, get the fluid drained out of it. We're going to go up underneath the hood and undo the hoses on the radiator to make sure there's not a vacuum on them, so that it'll let all the fluid out of the lines, and then we'll reverse everything after we take the pan off. We'll be able to get in there and you will be able to see where the filter is. So right now we're just going to go ahead and take this down. This orange stuff that's here on the sides is the gasket maker that was put on here. It's a Permatech gasket maker. We do not want to reuse any of that, so we don't have to do any of the work on the pan side. We're just going to clean off this orange gasket maker from the side that's on the transmission. So the next step is to take this down and start working on getting this drained out, and we'll come back when we start taking it apart, and anything we run into we'll just add to the video. So we've got the whole pan down now. I've got it dropped down here in the drain pan. Still dripping a little bit, most of the fluid's out now. So now you can see the filter on here. So there's going to be a couple bolts. There's little cab bolts. They might be 1/2 inch, I'm not sure, I'm about to find out. But this is the filter we're going to drop down. Once we replace there's a neck coming down into the filter, and that's where that O-ring should be. So we'll replace the O-ring, and then there's a gasket between the bottom of the transmission and the filter. We'll replace that gasket. We'll put the new filter in, and then we're gonna put that gasket in for the transmission pan after we make sure all this edge here gets all cleaned off. It looks like all the gasket material came off on the transmission pan. I don't really see much of the transmission of that gasket maker on the bottom of the transmission, so that's a good thing. But I will take that razor and just drag it along here on just flat. I'll just drag it along here and just make sure we don't have anything on this mating surface for the transmission pan gasket. I don't want that gasket not to be able to seal to this. And just kind of looking up under here, we'll take a look inside the bottom of the pan, because there's all the material that didn't get poured out because we don't have enough space in here. If we had jacked this up, if we had if we had this up on a lift, it'd be easier to work on. So as you can see, it's a little bit harder because we're up underneath on the ground, but that's what we have to work with for now. So I'm going to take some paper towels real quick and just wipe the bottom of this so I can pull the pan out. We're going to take a look in the pan and just see if there's a bunch of metal shavings or anything that's telltale of any issues with the transmission itself. In this situation, we're going to replace the filter and hope that the reason we're having issues with the transmission is because the filter might be clogged. I've had a transmission technician that's local tell me that I should look into that, and I had somebody on one of my Facebook forum groups also tell me that I should look into that. Just replace the filter, see if it fixes the issue with the transmission not shifting correctly. If it fixes it, then I don't need to have the transmission rebuilt. But if it doesn't, then the next step is going to have to be taking the whole transmission out and taking it to a local shop that I know and having him rebuild the transmission. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Well, it's starting to rain, so we're gonna have to call it for a moment. Hopefully it'll pass. It wasn't supposed to rain right now, but we'll take a look at it in a minute. We're gonna get the tools and stuff off the back of the car and put them up. It's part of not having an open garage or a shop to work in, but we might do with what we've got. So here's the top and bottom hoses. These go down to the transmission. You can actually see the lines in the back on the top of the transmission. The metal lines that are coming out right there, that's going to the transmission. So those two metal lines come up to the hoses where they're actually tied together right there with the hose clamps, and those rubber hoses run underneath, all the way underneath, and then they come up right here. One attaches to the bottom and one attaches to the top. And as I mentioned before, I just want to undo these to make sure there's not a vacuum on these hoses so that all the fluid's not able to come out. So I'm just going to undo the hose clamps and then just wiggle these two lines off. So I've added a hose to the top port here, and I've got the bottom port open, so whatever fluid that's still left in the inside of the radiator, I'm just going to make sure we get all that fluid out. I don't want any of that fluid stuck in here and it's got some grit or dirt or gunk in it. So I'm just going to blow in the end of this and hopefully some of that fluid will come out. Got a little bit more. So it was some that was just sitting in there. Alright, I think that's it. Alright, now it's just reversing everything. Put the hoses back on. Get the clamps clamped back together. So I'm hoping you'll be able to see this. If you look at the pan in a little bit of reflection, you can see these pieces here. That's like old pan gasket stuff that was in here. That's most of what this is. These are just like actual little chunks. That must be the old pan gasket. I don't know of anything that's in the transmission that would be like that. So my hope is that's what that is. That's what it looks like to me. So I'm gonna clean this pan. Well, I'm getting rid of this pan anyway. And like I said, thankfully all of the Permatech gasket material that the previous owner placed on here to reseal this is actually on the pan. And the bottom of the transmission itself actually looks pretty clean. So I've got all the fluid that I captured. And he had replaced the fluid when he did this pan. I'm trying to remember what side of the pan this was on where it was leaking. I believe it was over here where it was leaking, and as you can tell there's actually almost no gasket material in between here, and I believe that was right where that was leaking, right across. In some earlier video I posted, there was a gap between the Permatex, and I think this is right where that leak was, where there's just no Permatex around that bolt. So we're not reusing this pan anyway. We're going to put the new pan in. So let me get the bottom of the bottom of the transmission cleaned up, and we'll get the filler tube out. I've got the lines on the front screwed back together. There was some fluid that came out when I took the lines off the radiator itself, so there was some more fluid that came out. The fluid has stopped, for the most part, dripping off the bottom of the transmission here. I got a couple paper towels just to catch some drips, but we're just going to get some of that cleaned up and start putting it back together again. I have had to stop working on account of rain twice now, but that's life, so that's what we're working with today. So we're back at it now. It's kind of cleared up for a second. Still cloudy, but it's not raining. We're back up underneath here. Transmission filter has been pulled down now, so that's not up there anymore. So this is the bottom of the transmission without the pan on. I've cleaned up all around the edges of the metal where the transmission pan gasket's going to go with a razor. I actually scraped it with a razor. Now, you can never tell what kind of work the person before you did. I just want to show you this because I thought this was very interesting. Do you really think this is the way to do this? So this is the top of the transmission filter, and as you can see, there is all kinds of gunk in here. I didn't put any of this on here. This isn't staged. This is just what's sitting on top of the filter. So I think that this is justification to say it might have been clogged. Now, there are these little tiny bits of like a flake in here, these little tiny bits. Now, I don't know if that would be normal to see a little bit of fragments of something. I don't know, they're like, yeah, definitely a little tiny piece of metal. Would that be enough to say that the transmission is probably shot and this is all for nothing? But the filter is caked in gunk. I mean, I think there's even grass in here. So getting this cleaned out, getting the bottom of the transmission cleaned off, and we've got the replacement gasket that goes on here. There must be I saw something about there being an O-ring, so I got to figure out where the O-ring is. Put the O-ring back on, put the gasket on, screw the filter back up where it goes, and then yeah. So the screws in here, they're actually screws. They're not bolts. I thought they would be bolts. So let me see if I can find the. Yeah, one of them dropped in the bottom of my drain pan. I got to pull out, but this is like a massive flathead screw, and that's what holds the transmission filter on. And as you can see, I don't know how much space between the ground down here and the bottom of the transmission, so what I had to do is get my little shorty flathead, and that fit in there and it's got enough grip that I can actually turn it, and those weren't very tight, so it wasn't that hard to get out, so that was good. But like I said, I will have to figure out up under here on this where that filter came out. I'm gonna have to figure out where the O-ring is. You can see right there in the middle, there's kind of that big hole where the drip is about to come down at the top of the screen, and then there's kind of a hole diagonal to the right and up and diagonal to the left and down right at the top of the screen, right where this drip is about to drip. Right about, come on, not that one, that one. All right, so there's where the hole is. That's where the transmission filter screws in. I can't use my other hand because I really don't have any room to get one hand in here, much less two, but I just wanted to show you that's where my guess is that might actually be where the O-ring is sitting in that hole. So I'm going to put a new O-ring there, and then put the new filter in, screw the new filter in, and we'll just do things in reverse and get the gasket put on the pan, put some screws through it, and get the screws tightened up. Sorry, my hand's shaking there. I've got my arm fully extended to get the camera this far under here, trying not to get any transmission fluid dripping on it. So that's the plan, and we'll just kind of give updates as we progress through getting this stuff put on. Alright, so we've had enough break with the rain to come back out again and take a look at this. The way this is going to work is the top part of this metal flange here is what's going to mate up against the bottom of the transmission, and there is a little gasket that goes with this. Now the ATP kit has instructions in here and says that you do not put, when you look online it says to just put this in dry, but the box that it came in says that you should put some transmission fluid on the gasket. So I've got the screws here, and I'm going to get this set up to install. I'm not going to be able to film while I'm doing the install, so once I get it in place I'll just reshoot some more videos so you can see what So this is the filters in place now, and you can see those two flathead screws that were installed, and there is a way that this goes on here so that the bigger holes that are on the top match with the hole that's in between the two screws, and there's kind of like a indentation in the filter right here where that bolt is. You can actually see indentation in the filter there for that bolt to fit and not run into the metal. So that's an indicator on here of the direction of the fit for that, so I just wanted to show that real quick. So I'll get the gasket ready. Got the gasket in the new pan, and then I've got the new bolts here too, so I'll be able to put all this together, and once I get this installed I'll show you what it looks like with the new pan on. Sorry about the white balance there, coming in and out of the sun here. So just wanted to show this real quick. So setting up the gasket on here, obviously this can only go one way for the bolt holes. This has this corner in the pan right here, the rest of it's square, but there's this corner cut off here. So if you flip this over to where it's light gray, it won't fit. So the light gray goes towards the actual pan, and the black side goes up towards the transmission. But one thing that's different about this pan is that it's got this little cutout notch here. I don't know that this is going to be an issue, but I did want to point this out. So when this gasket gets put on, it's just right at the edge where I can almost feel a little bit of the gasket is over this edge here. And I don't know with this, it's kind of weird, it's like backwards. The cutout should be on this side to match on the inside here, but they don't have it like that. Now, another thing is with these bolts, they say that they've got, it's like this third hand gasket where you can put the bolts up inside the gasket and it'll kind of hold it in place because the holes are smaller, but it doesn't really do that. With the old bolts, grab an old bolt out of here real quick. So this is an old bolt. So the old bolt, obviously the thread size is no different, but these bolts just, they're not doing that third hand thing that it's supposed to do. I don't think I'm gonna have a problem with this anyway, but sorry, not really filming, paying too much attention to putting this bolt in here, but I don't know that that's actually gonna hold. Maybe if the gasket's off a little bit, but I don't know. Not sure. It's kind of a neat idea, but those holes in the gasket need to be a little bit smaller for this to actually screw into. Otherwise the bolts just fall out. Yeah, it's no different with the other ones because they're the same thread as the new ones that I bought. So anyway, just wanted to show you that real quick. Well, as you can see at the moment, I'm not up underneath the Nova right now. We were working on replacing the gasket and the filter and the transmission pan, and got everything pulled apart and went to put the new pan back on with the gasket in it after we got the filter installed. You know, it took a good bit of work to do all that, but finally got the pan up where it was supposed to be, and found out that the bolt holes in the bottom of the transmission that the pan mounts to are stripped, at least 2 of them. I'm only torquing them to 12 foot-pounds. The spec on that's supposed to be 10.5 to 13, so I torqued them to 12. And I got 2 on the bottom end, on the back side of the car, to torque to 12, and I couldn't get the front 2 to torque to 12 or anything else. They're just completely stripped out. So I know there's a few options on this. I can either throw some JB weld in there and put the bolts in and hope it holds in place, or I can throw some gasket sealer in there and let it set and hope that holds it in place. You can drill the hole out and tap it to a bigger bolt size. The issue you might run into there is there's not much room around the flange of the transmission pan itself for a bigger bolt head to fit. So that's an issue you got to work on. Or you can drill it and tap it and get what's called a helicoil, which is like a sleeve. It's a threaded sleeve on both sides of the sleeve. The inside diameter thread on the sleeve is the original thread of the bolt that you're trying to put in on the car now, and the outside of the sleeve is threaded to a bigger thread, a bigger diameter and a bigger thread, so that the helicoil can slide into the new thread that you threaded into the transmission bell housing. So there's a bunch of different options. What would your option be? Please comment in the comment section. We are not finished with this project yet. This transmission was going to get sent off sooner or later, probably anyway, just to have the insides rebuilt. We have reverse but no forward gears, so apparently the torque converter's fine, but maybe the high band and the transmission's bad. But we're just going to buy a whole kit to rebuild all the parts on the inside, the clutches and the bands and all that kind of stuff. But for now we're at a stopping point, and I'm not working on this one right now. We had a few other projects we worked on today, so not doing the transmission at the moment. That was kind of a bummer, so I'm stopping on this and gonna work on something else, do a couple other things, and get back around to it when we can. So thanks for taking the time to watch, and please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the channel. I'd appreciate it. You can look at my other playlist. If you're outside of the Nova project playlist, you can find some other playlists that I have, some product reviews and things like that. But I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I'll see you again soon.